A reminder that you don't always need people to give direction, don't always need to calculate which of the two roads will get you through the wood a minute faster. Things don't have to be constantly happening to remind you of being alive.
Jacob Geller is a channel that generates a feeling that I am fully aware of but rarely talk about. I like video games. I also like movies, animated projects, comics, comedy, music, theater, documentaries, reportages. The list can go on. But if I'm honest, I like all of these things for both different and similar reasons. What I mean by this is that while I have particular tastes and expectations while consuming any of these, my experiences with the rest of them make an impact with each other. I can't read or research without thinking of a documentary, or go watch a theatrical performance without thinking of movies, and I cannot watch a movie without thinking of video games. I mean, it makes sense why this is. We all build our expectations based on what we experience in media through its many forms, but that's the key here. I don't think I have met as many people that actually act with this kind of perception. If anything, it's quite the opposite. We put value on the media based on its form rather than its artistic expression, to the point where people will look down on one of them just for being what they are. To put it on a more exemplified word, people would look down on comics, animations, and video games just because they're, well, comics, animations, and video games. There still are plenty of people who will look at them as just shallow means of entertainment just because of the form in which these artistic expressions are represented. The biggest example I can give to this is with the way society found an appreciation for comic books thanks to the world of Marvel, yet they will rather sit through all of the Marvel live action wars 20 times in a row, including the ones they don't like, before even considering reading a comic book because I guess that's just the childish way to consume them in their eyes? I can also apply this idea to my own life. I don't like the traditional concept of art, like artistic paintings, for example. I don't obtain any significant experience on watching a painting like Who's Afraid of Red, Blue and Yellow, or Andy Warhol's entire artistic ideology, those kinds of methods of artistic expression. I feel they rely so much on what the audience might say rather than the artist actually having something to say, if you ask me. And I'm pretty sure that me saying that will label me as uncultured, a peasant, or an idiot, or any kind of offensive term that downplays the amount of brain cells that I have. Yet they will not see any appeal on games like Lost Guardian, Red Dead Redemption 2, or Journey simply because they're video games. They wouldn't even bring a shallow argument like mine. They will simply reject them despite those products creating unique experiences that are just as valid as the ones that these paintings make. Meanwhile, in Jacob's videos, it shows the deep impact that video games, just like any other form of media, can create a connection with people that probably wasn't even intended to create. The video that really hit me was the one where he talks about the concept of artificial loneliness because of how the section that resembles Red Dead Redemption 1 is very empty compared to the rest of the game. And for all we know, that could mean a lot of different things, from the game just creating a sense of freedom within the game to just have less things to do because the developers only had so much time to finish the game. But it was through its own experience that it manages to mean something more personal, something more reflective and intimate. I get it. At least since the NES, video games have been seen like nothing more than a toy due to the fact that they were shown as such to the public, for the sake of reaching a market that could make as many sales as possible. So there is a bit of responsibility on the industry itself to show itself as something more important, which is kinda hard to do when you have the industry explaining the difference of gambling and the surprise mechanics with loot boxes. However, the argument of certain forms of media being more shallow than others falls apart in at least two factors. One of them is the double standard in which the culture portrays these forms of media. Like, comics, animation, and video games don't have any significant value to a person's mindset. but suddenly are those forms and those forms alone what causes our next generation to be violent? As if the coffee incident in GTA San Andreas was more dangerous than the entirety of the porn industry, and Dragon Ball suddenly causes more impact on children than the UFC? I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a sense of caution about what we're exposed to on social media or media as a whole, but that's actually my point. We can't say that a form of expression doesn't matter until very specific circumstances happen. Any form of media should either be irrelevant or important, not sometimes one and sometimes another. The second factor that falls apart is the idea of every form of media having specific labels of interpretation by default. And by that I mean the idea that video games are always toys, books are always complex, animation is always for kids, comics are always for nerds, and paintings are always for sophisticated people. Which couldn't be further from the truth. Forms of media are not the same as their own genres. Any game is just a form of expression, like any other painting. Any animation can be as complex and thought-provoking like a live-action movie, and any comic can tell a thought-provoking narrative like any other book. If I could bring an example of that through Jacob's content, it will be on its video about the quiet sadness about Mario Galaxy, which, funny enough, gets translated by YouTube region's auto-translation as the melancholic silence in Mario Galaxy, where he even acknowledges how the game manages to tell a story in an execution that's quite similar to the famous book called The Little Prince.
Maybe Mario could use a power-up to fly outside the atmosphere of the ship. Maybe he could hop these small rocks and wander out into the garden. But why would he want to? We've got everything we need right here.
Getting a little bit more personal now, my mom managed to make me able to read through the Tom and Jerry comic books, and before noticing it, I started learning poetry and its strength at the age of 7, with the first poem I've ever read being The Kid That Wanted to Be Everything by Manuel Benitez Borrasco, which I recommend if you manage to find a good English translation. And if you found amusing that I even consider recommending a poem just because I mentioned its language, then you probably get my point a bit more by now. Jacob Geller's work manages to give me a sense of union for the entire world of art. It shows me a visual representation of what happens when you open your mind to as many forms of artistic expression as possible in order to build an even bigger perspective of the world around us, from how a video game can express the existence of loneliness to how a singular painting can express that much worldwide meaning, or even the literary soul of a library. It helps me realize that what I'm doing, that what we are doing, matters, simply from the fact that we have something to say, no matter how or where we say it. Something that I can prove even more by just doing this video, because even talking about his work on YouTube shows the impact that this form of media can have, since, as I have mentioned in previous videos of this marathon, doing something online gets also seen as less worthy of attention compared to something on TV, simply because of its platform, regardless of the quality of this craft. One of the examples of this is his video talking about the search for the last big secret in Shadow of the Colossus. Now, Team Ico is kind of a standard in his work, but this video shows the deep connection that people, just like you and me, can have about a form of media where they will stay for over a decade doing research and overall making a community that just wants to believe in something and find their answers to it. I don't want to get religion into this, but since that search even brought that up, if that sense of belief didn't compare to that just a bit, then I don't know what would. And if you think he only talks about video games, well, no. He talks about the multiple ways to live being in a forest, how society is designed for violence, the small presence we have in the universe with paperclips, or even about how gaming journalism could evolve when writing about video games. It's just thought-provoking. One of my major goals with this marathon is not to just prove to the world the kind of content that I am capable of making, but to also sit down and look back at the creators that helped me build a sense of craft, that inspire me and motivate me to even consider becoming a content creator, both online and on traditional forms. And because of that, if Jacob gets to hear this, the major thing I can say is thanks. Thanks for inspiring me, and thanks for listening.